I'm Claire Matthews, 33, and for a decade, my family has called me the one who never made it. They brag about their house, their Tesla, their rich legacy, while I quietly sip water from my Goodwill jacket. At a family gathering last year, they joked about Claire and her rental apartment. What they don't know is, I own that apartment, and 78 other apartments in that building, including the ones they live in. Before I tell you everything, tell me, where are you listening? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. I walked into our annual family gathering in Charleston, square-shouldered and carrying my usual thrift bag. My cousin Lucas gave me a look that said, "Oh, you came." Meanwhile, his Rolex caught the sun like a threat. My family wasn't ruthless in a loud way. They smiled when they cut you off. They talked about investing and inheritance. I talked about actions and spreadsheets. Just not out loud. Not yet. The sting of that last family gathering, it was still a fresh wound, a phantom ache behind my ribs. The clinking of crystal glasses, the murmur of self-congratulatory laughter, it all echoed in my mind like a discordant symphony. Aunt Valerie, her voice dripping with mock concern, asking if I could even spell portfolio. Uncle Frank, his jowls shaking with mirth, remarking on my modest contribution to the family average. They thought it was a joke. A harmless jest at the expense of the family's black sheep. But for me, it was a confirmation. A quiet, undeniable truth whispered by the very people who were supposed to be my anchor. You don't belong here. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you? Not by a lover or a friend, but by your own blood? The kind of betrayal that doesn't come with a knife in the back, but with 1,000 tiny cuts, inflicted by smiles and veiled contempt. That's what it felt like. Each dismissive glance, each cutting remark, each unasked question about my life, they were all tiny shards of ice, embedding themselves in my skin. The shock wasn't in what they said, but in the sheer, unadulterated pleasure they took in saying it. The hurt was a cold, spreading void, a realization that their affection was conditional, their acceptance tied to a ledger sheet. And the reality? The reality was that I was an outsider looking in, an anomaly in their perfectly curated world of inherited wealth and effortless success. The air in that opulent dining room, usually thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meats, suddenly felt thin, suffocating. My breath caught in my throat, a knot of humiliation tightening in my stomach. All I could taste was the bitter tang of their judgment, lingering long after the laughter had died down. It was a moment that redefined everything. A moment where the mask of polite indifference I usually wore shattered, revealing the raw, exposed nerve of my vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, a quiet fire began to ignite. Before the storm, there was a quiet hum to my life. It was a life meticulously crafted, piece by painstaking piece, in the serene solitude of my studio apartment. The space itself was a testament to my quiet rebellion. Perched above a small, family-owned bakery, the air was perpetually infused with the warm, comforting scent of rising dough and sweet vanilla. In the mornings, before the city truly stirred, the gentle clatter from below would begin, a rhythmic percussion of baking sheets and hushed voices. I'd wake to the diffuse glow of dawn filtering through the single, large window, stretching out onto the worn but deeply comfortable armchair I'd found at a flea market. It was here, with a steaming mug of black coffee cradled in my hands, that I'd begin my day. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of traffic slowly building on the streets below, a stark contrast to the cacophony of ambition and expectation that defined my family's world. My routine was simple, almost monastic in its devotion to productivity. I'd spend hours poring over market reports, the crisp rustle of pages a constant companion. The glow of my laptop illuminated my face as I delved into spreadsheets, dissecting numbers, identifying trends, charting the subtle shifts in the economic landscape. Each line of data, each calculated risk, was a brick laid in the foundation of something I was building, something invisible to the naked eye but solid in its potential. Lunch was often a simple affair, a sandwich from the bakery downstairs, eaten at my small, circular table, the aroma of fresh bread still clinging to the air. Sometimes, the baker's daughter, A quiet girl with flour dusting her apron would bring it up, offering a shy smile and a fleeting connection. Those small, unburdened interactions were moments of grace, untainted by the complex dynamics of family. Evenings were equally focused. The city lights would begin to twinkle, transforming the urban sprawl into a canvas of glittering possibility. I'd often walk, aimlessly at first, letting my thoughts wander, processing the day's information, allowing solutions to complicated financial puzzles to unfurl in my mind like silent blossoms. My steps were deliberate, each one a testament to the steady, unyielding progress I was making. There were no lavish dinners, no extravagant vacations, no designer clothes. My wardrobe consisted of practical, well-made pieces, chosen for their durability and comfort. The Goodwill jacket, as my family so derisively pointed out, was a symbol, not of poverty, but of priority. It was a deliberate choice, a conscious rejection of their superficial values. My entertainment was found in books, in documentaries, in the quiet pursuit of knowledge that sharpened my mind and broadened my perspective. I learned about zoning laws, about urban development, about the intricate dance of supply and demand that governed the real estate market. Each piece of information was a tool, carefully honed and stored away for future use. My father, bless his soul, had understood this quiet pursuit. He was the one who had, years ago, stepped away from the glittering, soulless machinery of the family business. He'd chosen integrity over profit, a decision that had alienated him from his siblings, but had cemented his bond with me. He'd seen something in me, a similar independent spirit, a refusal to be swayed by the siren song of easy money. He'd taught me the value of a dollar earned through honest labor, the satisfaction of building something from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick. His memory was a constant source of strength, a quiet affirmation that I was on the right path, even when the world and my family seemed to suggest otherwise. He'd left me with no grand inheritance, no vast fortune, but something far more valuable, a compass, pointing always towards authenticity and quiet ambition. His influence was woven into the fabric of my days, the rude, matter-of-fact approach to problems, the uninvited nature of my existence in their yachting weekends. They said I was wasting the Matthews name. I saw it as honoring the best of it. The evenings often ended with me curled up in my armchair, a book open on my lap, the city lights a soft blur outside my window. The silence in the apartment was profound, a sanctuary from the relentless noise of comparison and competition. It was in this quiet space that I truly felt at home, truly felt myself. My life, though seemingly devoid of the markers of success my family chased, was rich in its own way. It was rich in purpose, in self-discipline, in the quiet thrill of knowing I was building something, brick by unseen brick. I was planting seeds in fertile ground, nurturing them with patience and perseverance, waiting for the day they would finally break through the surface and unfurl. This was my calm before the storm, a period of intense, focused preparation, a quiet gathering of strength for a battle I knew, deep down, was inevitable. I had no idea then just how much that quiet strength would be tested, or how profoundly the world I inhabited would shatter. But I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that I was ready. The seeds of doubt, they didn't just appear overnight. They were planted subtly, almost imperceptibly, like tiny cracks appearing in a perfectly smooth pane of glass. At first, they were just whispers, faint shadows at the edge of my vision. A forgotten promise, a missed call, an ambiguous text. Things that, on their own, could be easily explained away, dismissed as minor inconveniences or simple oversights. But when strung together over weeks and months, they began to form a pattern, a disquieting melody that played on a loop in the back of my mind. It started with Lucas. My cousin, always the golden boy, the one with the effortless charm and the ready smile that could disarm anyone. He was the family's designated real estate guru, the one who always knew about the next big development, the next hot property. He'd always been a little competitive with me, even in our childhood, a rivalry disguised as playful banter. But lately, there was a new edge to it. A sharpness in his eyes when I mentioned a new investment strategy one was researching, a dismissive wave of his hand when I tried to engage him in a serious discussion about market trends. He'd brush me off with a casual, "Oh, Claire, you're always buried in those dusty reports. Live a little." But the smile never quite reached his eyes. Then there was Aunt Valerie. She had always been the matriarch, the one who held the family together with her carefully orchestrated gatherings and her unwavering belief in the Matthews legacy. But her calls, once frequent and filled with anecdotes about family news, became less so. And when she did call, her questions about my life seemed more pointed, less genuinely interested. "Still in that charming little rental, dear?" she'd ask, her voice laced with an insincere sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Or, "Any progress on finding a nice young man and settling down? You're not getting any younger, you know." It wasn't just the questions themselves, but the underlying tone, the subtle judgment that simmered beneath the surface. It was as if she was probing, looking for weakness, confirming a preconceived notion of my failure. I remember one specific evening, months before the big reveal. We were at a casual family dinner, one of their smaller, less formal affairs. Uncle Frank, usually jovial and loud, was unusually quiet, his eyes darting around the room, settling on me for a moment before flitting away. He brought up a new investment opportunity, a large commercial property in the city center. Lucas, ever eager to impress, launched into a detailed explanation of the projected returns, the potential for expansion. I listened, my mind quietly dissecting their figures, noting the subtle inaccuracies, the overly optimistic projections. When I tried to interject, to ask a clarifying question about the property's zoning restrictions, Lucas cut me off smoothly. "Claire, darling, I'm sure your research is fascinating, but some things are best left to the professionals." He winked at the table, and a ripple of polite laughter followed. It wasn't the dismissal that bothered me as much as the collective agreement in their eyes, the shared assumption that I was out of my depth, that my contributions were irrelevant. Later that night, as I lay in my bed, the familiar scent of baking bread wafting up from below, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just their condescension, it was something deeper, a sense of exclusion that went beyond their usual snobbery. They were talking about a new, large investment, a collaboration. And I, the supposed financial outlier, the one who never made it, wasn't even considered for a whispered consultation. It felt like a subtle shift, a quiet drawing of lines in the sand that I hadn't seen being etched. The unsettling feeling grew, fueled by a series of small, seemingly insignificant events. A hurried phone call Lucas took in the middle of a family dinner, his voice low and conspiratorial. A new, expensive watch on Uncle Frank's wrist that he claimed was a gift from an unnamed business associate. Aunt Valerie's sudden insistence on redirecting conversations whenever I brought up anything related to real estate or finance. They were all signals, unclear in their specific meaning, but radiating a pervasive unease. My gut, a loyal compass that had guided me through countless financial analyses, began to churn. It was the feeling you get when you walk into a room and the air is just a little too still, a little too quiet, a little too charged. The feeling that something significant is happening, just out of sight, just beyond your grasp. I started observing them more closely, almost unconsciously. I noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Lucas and Valerie, the way Uncle Frank would clear his throat whenever a certain topic came up. It was like watching a play where I was the only one who didn't have the full script. They were performing, and I was in the audience, picking up on the subtle cues, the fleeting expressions that betrayed something deeper. The unease wasn't a loud alarm bell. It was a slow, creeping dread, a persistent whisper that something was wrong, something fundamental was being hidden. And the more I observed, the more that whisper grew into a low thrum, a constant vibration beneath the surface of my calm existence. I didn't know what it was, not yet. But I knew it was coming. And the anticipation, the slow, agonizing crawl of doubt, was almost as debilitating as the eventual truth. It was building, brick by imperceptible brick, to something I instinctively knew would shatter my world. The shatter moment wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet implosion. It was the precise instant when the last thread of denial snapped, and the full, crushing weight of their betrayal landed with an almost audible thud. It wasn't a scream or a dramatic confrontation in a darkened room. It was a brightly lit dining room, filled with the clatter of silverware and the scent of expensive wine, and a single, devastating sentence. I had arrived at the annual gathering in Charleston, already armed with the quiet resolve of knowing I would finally reveal my truth. But I hadn't anticipated their prelude. As the main course was cleared and the conversation turned, as it always did, to their successes, Lucas, ever the ringleader, stood up. He had a smug glint in his eyes, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Family," he began, his voice resonating with an almost theatrical flair. "As you know, Uncle Frank, Aunt Valerie, and I have been working tirelessly on a major new acquisition. A truly significant investment that will cement the Matthews legacy for generations." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing the collective anticipation to build. My chest tightened, a familiar feeling of exclusion washing over me, even though I knew what was coming. "We're talking about the acquisition of the prestigious Oakhaven Towers." A collective gasp went around the table, followed by excited whispers. Oakhaven Towers. The most exclusive, sought-after residential building in Charleston. A towering monument of glass and steel, home to the city's elite, including, ironically, most of my immediate family. My own apartment, the rental they loved to mock, was located just a few blocks away. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew that name. I knew it intimately. But the look on their faces, the self-congratulatory smiles, the utter confidence in their coup, it sent a cold shiver down my spine. Lucas continued, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. "We've been quietly negotiating with the current owner, a mysterious holding company, for months. They've been playing hard to get, but we've finally reached an agreement in principle. A phenomenal deal, I might add. Below market value, even." He puffed out his chest, basking in the adoration of the room. "Soon, Oakhaven Towers will be entirely ours. And as landlords, we'll finally be able to optimize its potential." The emphasis on optimize was chilling, carrying with it the unspoken promise of increased rents, stricter rules, a complete overhaul of the building's operations. Aunt Valerie chimed in, her voice shrill with excitement. "And you know what that means for our own units, darling? Instant equity. Our apartments will be worth a fortune." She beamed, completely missing the subtle flinch that went through me. Uncle Frank, usually more reserved, actually chuckled. "No more mystery owner to deal with. We can finally get rid of those undesirable elements." His eyes flickered to me for a fleeting second, a casual dismissal that cut deeper than any insult. And in that moment, the world tilted. It wasn't just Oakhaven Towers. It was the holding company, the mysterious owner, the months of playing hard to get. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. A wave of nausea washed over me, the perfectly roasted lamb suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, chilling me to the core. They were not just discussing buying a building. They were discussing buying my building. The one I had painstakingly, meticulously acquired over the past year, through a labyrinthine network of shell corporations and blind trusts, specifically to keep my ownership a secret, to protect myself from their prying eyes and grasping hands. The full weight of their contempt, their absolute disregard for me, crashed down. They hadn't just mocked my tiny apartment. They had actively, secretly, tried to dismantle my life's work. They were laughing at my foundation, not knowing it was the very ground they stood on. The grief wasn't loud or histrionic. It was a silent, suffocating despair. A realization that the chasm between us was not just about money or status, but about fundamental values. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an obstacle, a joke, something to be stepped over or, even better, acquired and controlled. My vision blurred. The vibrant colors of the dining room, the sparkling crystal, the opulent decor, all dissolved into a hazy, indistinct smear. I felt detached, observing myself from a great distance, a silent observer of my own devastation. The air grew heavy, thick with the unsaid, with the crushing weight of their ignorance and my burgeoning rage. My hands, resting on my lap, trembled almost imperceptibly. I clenched them into fists, the nails digging into my palms, a small, private pain that grounded me in the overwhelming tsunami of emotion. The disbelief was a physical blow. How could they? How could they be so utterly blind, so consumed by their own self-importance, that they would try to usurp something so profoundly mine? The quiet devastation that followed wasn't about tears or shouting. It was about the slow, agonizing splintering of my perception of reality. The safe, predictable world I thought I inhabited, where family, however flawed, still held a modicum of loyalty, had vanished. In its place was a barren landscape of betrayal, where trust was a fragile illusion and kinship a mere formality. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was tight, choked with unspoken accusations, with the bitter taste of their arrogance. I just sat there, a silent sentinel amidst their gleeful pronouncements, my entire world contracting to a single, burning point of anguish. Everything changed in that moment. The path I thought I was on, the future I envisioned, it all dissolved. The betrayal wasn't just a personal slight, it was a systemic assault on my very being, on everything I had quietly built. And in the silent aftermath of that realization, a new resolve began to solidify, harder and colder than anything I had ever known. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. In the immediate aftermath of that shattering revelation, a strange, quiet calm settled over me. It wasn't resignation, nor was it shock in the conventional sense. It was more like a profound stillness, the eye of a hurricane where the wind had suddenly ceased to blow. My family continued their excited chatter about the impending acquisition, their voices a distant hum, like bees buzzing around a hive. But their words no longer held power over me. They were just noise, filtered through the thick, insulating layer of my newly formed resolve. Instead of reacting with the anger that surely would have erupted in anyone else, I became an observer. My eyes, once glazed with disbelief, sharpened, taking in every detail. Lucas's exaggerated gestures, Aunt Valerie's preening smile, Uncle Frank's self-satisfied nods. They were caricatures, oblivious puppets dancing to a tune only they could hear. And in that detachment, I found a strange kind of power. The power to watch, to listen, to collect every single piece of their unwitting confession. My internal monologue, usually a swirling current of thoughts and calculations, narrowed to a laser focus. Observe. Analyze. Plan. The initial wave of devastation had receded, leaving behind a hard, cold core of determination. There was no room for tears, no space for self-pity. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense, a desire to hurt them as they had hurt me. This was about something far more fundamental, reclamation. Reclaiming my dignity, my hard work, my self-worth. Reclaiming the narrative they had so carelessly tried to erase. Over the next few weeks, I moved with a quiet, almost imperceptible stealth. My daily routines continued, unchanged on the surface, but beneath the placid exterior, a furious, intricate machinery was at work. I spent hours in my apartment, not poring over market reports for new investments, but meticulously reviewing the existing ones. Every deed, every contract, every registration document related to Oakhaven Towers and its intricate ownership structure was laid out, cross-referenced, and verified. I wanted no stone unturned, no detail overlooked. I began compiling a dossier, not just of legal documents, but of every cutting remark, every dismissive glance, every instance of their casual cruelty. I didn't write it down with anger in my heart, but with a clinical precision, as if I were documenting a scientific experiment. Dates, times, direct quotes. The small, everyday details that grounded their betrayal in a chilling reality. The way Aunt Valerie would purse her lips when she mentioned my modest circumstances. The barely veiled sneer in Lucas's voice when he talked about unprofessional ventures. These weren't just insults, they were evidence. Evidence of their systemic belittling, their calculated disregard. The internal transformation was profound. The Claire who had yearned for their approval, however fleeting, was gone. In her place was someone steelier, someone whose emotional resilience, once dormant, was now fully awakened. It wasn't a transformation born of rage, but of quiet, strategic thought. Every action was deliberate, every decision weighed against its long-term impact. I wasn't plotting a spontaneous outburst of fury. I was laying the groundwork for an undeniable, irrefutable truth. I continued to attend family gatherings, my presence a ghost in their midst. I listened to their boasts, their plans for optimizing Oakhaven, their casual dismissal of the mystery owner's stubbornness. Their words, once capable of inflicting deep wounds, now barely registered. They were merely providing me with more information, more pieces to the puzzle I was assembling. I practiced a quiet smile, a polite nod, allowing them to believe I was still the same easily dismissed Claire, the one who never made it. It was a subtle act of psychological warfare, letting them underestimate me, allowing their hubris to blind them to the coming storm. I gathered strength not from external validation, but from within. The knowledge that I held all the cards, that I possessed the undeniable truth, was a powerful, silent fuel. It wasn't about seeking vengeance, but about asserting my autonomy. It was about proving, not to them, but to myself, that I was more than their labels, more than their dismissals. I was an agent of change, capable of quiet, devastating action. Every fiber of my being was focused on this single objective, to dismantle their illusion, piece by painstaking piece, and to reclaim my narrative, my success, my life. I was preparing myself for the next stage of the journey, not with a roar, but with a whisper that would soon become an undeniable truth. The pieces were falling into place. The turn didn't come with a dramatic flourish or a sudden clap of thunder. It came, as all truly seismic shifts often do, with an almost mundane quietness. It was at the very next annual family gathering, precisely a year after the first one where they had so carelessly mocked my existence. The air in the opulent dining room was thick with their usual self-congratulatory chatter. They were reviewing their portfolios, projecting their future gains, their voices echoing with the hollow ring of inherited entitlement. Lucas, ever the ringleader, had just finished a lengthy, self-aggrandizing presentation of their collective real estate holdings, ending with a flourish as he brought up a slide titled Oakhaven Towers, our future crown jewel. He cleared his throat, a theatrical gesture, and began to speak. As you know, he purred, his eyes sweeping across the table, lingering on me with a flicker of condescension. We've been in protracted negotiations for Oakhaven Towers. The former owner, a stubborn and frankly, quite unprofessional holding company, has finally agreed to our terms. We expect the final paperwork to be signed next week. And then, finally, we can begin the process of... He paused for dramatic effect, a smirk playing on his lips, optimizing their existing tenant base. A ripple of approving murmurs went around the table. Aunt Valerie gave a triumphant nod, her eyes sparkling with avarice. Uncle Frank clapped Lucas on the back, a silent testament to his perceived brilliance. I had been sitting quietly, sipping my water, an almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. My heart, which had pounded with silent dread a year prior, was now beating with a steady, relentless rhythm. This was it. The moment I had meticulously prepared for, the culmination of countless hours of quiet planning and steely resolve. I let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing their collective anticipation to build to a crescendo. The room hummed with their self-satisfaction, their absolute certainty of victory. Then, slowly, deliberately, I placed my glass on the table, the soft clink echoing disproportionately in the sudden quiet. Every eye turned to me, a mixture of mild surprise and lingering amusement on their faces. "That's funny," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, barely above a whisper. Each word was carefully chosen, precisely weighted, designed to land with the force of a precisely aimed arrow. Because I'm the mystery owner. The silence that followed wasn't just a cessation of noise, it was a physical presence, heavy and absolute. It descended like a shroud, suffocating the last vestiges of their laughter, their smugness. Lucas, who had been about to take a triumphant sip of wine, froze, the glass halfway to his lips. It wobbled precariously, then slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the polished mahogany table with a sickening splinter of glass. Wine bloomed across the pristine tablecloth, a dark, spreading stain, a visual metaphor for the unraveling of their perfectly constructed reality. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a dawning comprehension that quickly morphed into pure, unadulterated shock. Aunt Valerie gasped, a sharp, choked sound that seemed to catch in her throat. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to stiffen, her carefully composed expression shattering into a mask of disbelief. Uncle Frank, usually so composed, so impervious, actually stammered, his jowls quivering. What are you talking about, Claire? His voice was a thin, reedy sound, stripped of its usual bluster. I'm talking about Oakhaven Towers, I said, my voice still quiet, but now imbued with an undeniable authority. I bought the building last year. Through a holding company. A very stubborn and, as you so eloquently put it, unprofessional holding company. My gaze swept across their stunned faces, allowing them to fully absorb the impact of my words. You're my tenants. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. They were stunned, not because I was loud, not because I was gloating, but because I had the receipt. The undeniable, meticulously documented proof that their entire carefully constructed narrative of my failure and their own effortless superiority was a lie. The balance of power had shifted, not with a roar, but with a quiet, devastating confession. Their faces, once radiating confidence, were now etched with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a burgeoning fear. They didn't fully realize what was happening, not yet. Not beyond the immediate, gut-punching reality that I, the family joke, held the reins of their very existence. The tables had turned, and their quiet revenge was only just beginning. The silence in the dining room, initially thick with shock, began to splinter, giving way to a chaotic flurry of whispers, choked exclamations, and stunned accusations. Lucas, still staring at the wine stains spreading across the table, finally found his voice, a choked, disbelieving croak. No, that's impossible. We did our due diligence. The company, it was untraceable. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, darted to me, filled with a desperate plea for me to recant, to tell him this was all some elaborate, cruel joke. Aunt Valerie, recovering slightly, managed to force out, Claire, dear, what is the meaning of this? This is highly inappropriate. A family gathering is no place for such outlandish claims. Her voice, however, lacked its usual imperious tone, laced instead with a desperate edge. Uncle Frank, ever the pragmatist, narrowed his eyes, a flicker of something almost akin to respect, quickly overshadowed by anger, appearing in their depths. Proof, he grunted, his voice surprisingly weak. Show us proof. I didn't mock them. I didn't gloat. There was no need. The scene unfolding before me, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them, was all the vindication I needed. With a calm I didn't entirely feel, I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim, elegant tablet. With a few taps, the screen mirrored onto the large flat-screen television, typically reserved for their vacation slideshows and investment presentations. The first slide was a simple title, Claire Matthews, A Quiet Portfolio. Beneath it, a meticulously organized list began to appear, line by line. 1. Oakhaven Towers, Charleston, South Carolina, acquired, Q3 2024. Owner, Solstice Holdings LLC, a company I owned, of course. Purchase price, $X million, a figure that made Lucas choke on air. Then came the photographs. Not just of the building's exterior, but of the signed deeds, the official registration documents, the transfer of ownership. Each piece of evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. Their faces, projected onto the screen in sharp relief, contorted with a mixture of horror and dawning realization. Lucas's jaw dropped. Aunt Valerie's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Frank's face turned a mottled purple. The list continued. 17 properties, each with its acquisition date, its holding company, its net value. The total net worth, boldly displayed at the bottom of the last slide, hit them like a physical blow. $65 million. No loans. All built while they laughed. While they dismissed me, while they whispered about my modest contribution, I had been quietly, diligently, building an empire. The room was utterly silent now, save for the faint hum of the projector. Their initial shock had given way to a stunned, almost paralyzed disbelief. The laughter, the condescension, the casual cruelty that had defined their interactions with me for a decade had evaporated, replaced by a gaping void. Finally, Uncle Frank, gathering what little composure he had left, cleared his throat. "Claire," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, almost pleading. We misjudged you. Clearly. This is extraordinary. Your family, should have been a part of this. A partnership. What do you say? We can put this behind us. Imagine what we could achieve together." He offered me a hesitant, almost conciliatory smile, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I looked at him, then at Lucas, who was now staring at the wine stain as if it held the secrets of the universe. And at Aunt Valerie, whose eyes, once so sharp with judgment, were now wide and strangely vulnerable. The sudden offer of partnership was a desperate scramble for relevance, a transparent attempt to salvage their pride and, more importantly, their potential financial gains. "No," I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. "Thank you for the offer, Uncle Frank. But no." His face fell. "But why? This is family, Claire." I paused, allowing the full weight of my words to sink in. "Because," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "you chose not to look." My gaze swept over the entire table. "You chose to see what you wanted to see. A failure. A joke. Someone to be pitted or worse, someone to be manipulated. You never asked about my life, about what I was building. You only saw what was shiny. And what you thought was shiny." The truth, delivered without anger, without a raised voice, landed with more force than any scream. They recoiled, not from my words, but from the mirror I held up to their own reflection. Their hubris, their snobbery, their casual cruelty, it was all laid bare. Then I spoke of the mansion. The grand, ancestral home where these annual gatherings took place, the very place they had voted to sell to a developer for condos, dismissing its sentimental value for a quick profit. "And that mansion," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet, formidable power, "the one you voted to sell? The one you were so eager to turn into sterile luxury units." Their eyes widened, another wave of dread washing over them. "I bought it." Another collective gasp. "Quietly. In her name." My gaze softened for a moment as I thought of my grandmother, a formidable woman who had taught me the value of roots, of history, of holding onto something true. It wouldn't become condos. It would become something better. I didn't elaborate, but the implication hung heavy in the air. A sanctuary, a legacy built on meaning, not just money. I didn't need their respect anymore. Their shock, their dawning horror, their desperate attempts at reconciliation, it was all confirmation of my path, not validation. I had built something real, not to impress them, but to prove something to myself. The quiet satisfaction that settled over me was profound, untainted by bitterness or the fleeting pleasure of vengeance. It was the satisfaction of dignity reclaimed, of a silent battle fought and won on my own terms. The fallout was a slow, agonizing unraveling for them, a meticulously unwoven tapestry of their self-importance. For me, it was the beginning of a profound, messy, yet utterly liberating healing. I didn't actively seek their downfall. I simply removed the scaffolding that had supported their inflated sense of self, and the structure, built on such shaky foundations, began to crumble under its own weight. Lucas was the first to feel the tremors. His carefully cultivated image as the family's Midas, the man with the golden touch, shattered. The news of Oakhaven Towers, the audacious acquisition by their supposed financial black sheep, spread like wildfire within their exclusive circles. People whispered. Deals he had been on the cusp of closing suddenly stalled. His clients, who had always implicitly trusted his judgment, began asking uncomfortable questions. He was no longer the brilliant visionary. He was the one who had been outmaneuvered by his own cousin, the one he had publicly ridiculed. The social repercussions were immediate and brutal in their subtle cruelty. Invitations stopped coming. Business lunches became scarce. His confidence, once his most potent weapon, withered under the relentless gaze of judgment. I heard through the grapevine that he was struggling to secure new financing, that his carefully leveraged empire was beginning to show cracks. It wasn't a triumphant victory for me, it was simply the natural consequence of his own arrogance. Aunt Valerie, whose social standing was her lifeblood, suffered a different kind of wound. The news about Oakhaven, and particularly about the mansion, was a devastating blow to her carefully constructed facade. Her meticulously planned charity galas, once the talk of the town, became the subject of polite, yet undeniably pointed, whispers. Did you hear about Claire Matthews? Imagine, her own niece owning their building. The pity in their voices was almost worse than the scorn. Her friends, once so eager to bask in her reflected glory, began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the family drama. I saw her once, at a grocery store, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, her eyes haunted. She didn't see me, and I felt no need to approach her. Her world was unraveling, not because I wished it, but because she had built it on sand, on the shifting currents of social validation and inherited prestige. Uncle Frank, perhaps, endured the most internal torment. The humiliation of being so utterly outmaneuvered by the person he had dismissed as insignificant gnawed at him. He was a man who prided himself on his shrewdness, his ability to read people, to control situations. To be so spectacularly wrong about me, to have underestimated me to such a profound degree, was a wound to his very identity. The financial consequences for him were less direct, as his wealth was deeply entrenched, but the blow to his ego was immense. I heard he began to drink more, his once booming laugh replaced by a strained silence. His health, already fragile, began to visibly decline. He became a recluse, his world shrinking, mirroring the shrinking of his once expansive influence. Meanwhile, my own world began to expand. The weight I hadn't realized I was carrying, the burden of their judgment, the quiet longing for their acceptance, lifted. It was like shedding a heavy cloak I had worn for years, revealing the true me beneath. The quiet confidence I had cultivated in solitude now bloomed into a vibrant, undeniable presence. I wasn't seeking vengeance, but I was living my truth, and that truth was a beacon. The process of healing was not linear. There were days when the raw hurt of their betrayal would resurface, a sharp pang in my chest. Memories of childhood slights, of moments where I had desperately sought their approval, would flash through my mind. But now, instead of succumbing to the pain, I could look at those memories with a detached clarity. I could acknowledge the hurt, but it no longer held power over me. It was a part of my story, not the entirety of it. I found solace in my work, in the tangible results of my quiet labor. I spent hours walking through Oakhaven Towers, not as an owner asserting dominance, but as a steward. I met with the building staff, the tenants, listening to their concerns, implementing changes that improved their lives. Simple things: better maintenance, faster response times, community initiatives. I started a scholarship fund for the children in the building, something small, yet deeply meaningful. I learned their names, their stories. These were the people who mattered, the ones whose lives I could genuinely impact. The satisfaction I derived from these interactions was far more profound than any financial gain. It was about building genuine connection, creating a community where everyone felt valued, a stark contrast to the sterile, transactional world my family inhabited. I also invested time in nurturing new connections, friendships built on mutual respect and shared values, not on lineage or net worth. I joined local community boards, lent my financial expertise to small businesses, and volunteered for causes I believed in. These relationships, free from the shadow of family expectation, were nourishing. They showed me a world beyond the narrow confines of my birthright, a world where integrity and kindness were the true currencies. The process of reclaiming my peace was rooted in action. I transformed the mansion, not into soulless condos, but into a center for women's entrepreneurship. It was a place where women, often overlooked and underestimated, could find resources, mentorship, and a community of support. The very walls that had once echoed with their laughter at my expense now resonated with the hum of innovation, the quiet power of women building their own dreams, brick by painstaking brick. It was my quiet monument, not to revenge, but to resilience. The ultimate consequence of their betrayal wasn't my downfall, but my ascent. I didn't rise to punish, but to move on and become stronger, rooted in purpose and compassion. The scars of betrayal remained, a quiet testament to the journey, but they no longer defined me. They had simply become part of the intricate, beautiful mosaic of who I was becoming. The dust has settled. The echoes of their laughter, once a persistent torment, are now just faint whispers, easily drowned out by the vibrant hum of my new life. I walk through the halls of the building they still inhabit, their nominal landlord, and I feel nothing but a quiet, unwavering clarity. I see Lucas in the elevator sometimes, his eyes clouded with a weary resignation, a stark contrast to the arrogant glint they once held. Aunt Valerie, when I pass her in the lobby, offers a tight, almost deferential nod, her posture no longer rigid with disdain, but softened by an undeniable humility. Uncle Frank, I hear, rarely leaves his apartment. The weight of his misjudgment, the spectacular failure of his perception, has truly broken something within him. I don't harbor bitterness. The corrosive power of resentment, I've learned, poisons the vessel it inhabits. And I refuse to be poisoned by their past actions. Forgiveness? No. Forgiveness implies that I'm letting them off the hook, absolving them of their choices. I haven't done that. I've simply acknowledged what happened, processed the pain, and moved on. The sting of their betrayal, the deep, emotional impact it had, is a part of my story, an indelible mark. But it no longer defines me. It's a scar, a testament to a wound that has healed, leaving behind stronger, more resilient tissue. My life is built on a foundation of genuine connections, quiet purpose, and the profound satisfaction of knowing I am beholden to no one but myself. The sounds of women collaborating, of ideas taking flight, now fill the rooms of what was once my family's ancestral home. The scent of fresh coffee and shared ambition has replaced the stale air of judgment and entitlement. It's a living monument to possibility, to the quiet power of resilience, to the strength that can be found in rebuilding, not just a life, but a community. I am free. Free from the need for their approval, free from the invisible chains of expectation they had tried to bind me with. But I am not the same person I was before. The naive girl who craved their acceptance is gone, replaced by a woman forged in the crucible of adversity, tempered by the fire of betrayal. I see the world with a sharper clarity now, recognizing the subtle currents of power, the hidden agendas, the true cost of superficiality. This new vision isn't cynical, it's simply real. It has taught me to trust my instincts, to value substance over facade, and to build my own legacy, not on inherited wealth, but on earned dignity. I still sip water, sometimes, from my Goodwill jacket. It's not an act of defiance anymore, but a quiet affirmation. A reminder of where I came from, of the choices I made, and of the unwavering strength that lies within. The laughter of my family, once a source of deep pain, is now just a distant echo, drowned out by the powerful, resonant hum of my own self-worth. Have you found your way back from betrayal? Have you shed the weight of others' expectations and reclaimed your own truth? The journey is long, and the path is often lonely. But the view from the other side, the quiet, unshakable peace of knowing you built something real, something true, is worth every single step.